rise to pure gambling. It was called naked shorting. It's as wild as it sounds. In short, George Soros said that the world's economy was turned into a gambling casino. It doesn't stop there. There's one more element. The Federal Reserve, this guy, Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan is supposed to be the top regulator of the financial system. Only one tiny little problem with that, though. Fundamentally, he didn't believe in regulation. He was a fan of Milton Friedman. He was a fan of Ronald Reagan. He was a fan of that nutcake Ayn Rand. He refused to regulate the mortgage lending industry. He even killed a bill for this purpose. Later on, Barney Frank gave him one, and he refused to use it. I can summarize all of this by quoting from The Economist magazine. The macroeconomic condition that set up this crisis stemmed in part from policy choices. Well, deregulation was a policy choice. The Federal Reserve ignored the housing bubble and kept short-term interest rates too low for far too long. What's this guy? He made that choice. It was a policy choice. There was something of a perfect storm in which policy choices, policy mistakes, combined with Wall Street's excesses. Lastly, who should the peasants drag to the guillotine, armed, of course, with pitchforks? Well, we've covered one guy already, Alan Greenspan. He ignored the dot-com bubble, he ignored the housing bubble. He testified to the Senate Banking Committee in 2003 that derivatives were extraordinarily useful for transferring risk. But you see how it all got focused into AIG without anybody seeming to know this. Hank Paulson is absolutely to blame. He was Bush's Secretary of the Treasury. He is the man directly responsible for the last straw that broke the camel's back, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. Of course, George Bush. Now, if you think I'm dumping on George Bush, the Times of London identified him also. He ignored all responsibility, he ignored all warnings, he did nothing. He believed in an ownership society, don't forget. He ignored people screaming in his face. His advisor, Larry Lindsey. Of course, he was very good at ignoring people screaming in his face. He ignored a warning out in his ranch in Crawford that Al-Qaeda was determined to strike America with 9/11. He said to the guy, okay, you've covered your ass, get out.
Ray, he was supposed to be known as the CEO president, the first president to have an MBA. Why did he ignore these people?
All I can say, Rick, is that you're great at swallowing Republican propaganda. His stint getting his MBA was a joke. Watch the movie W for that. He ignored warnings that the invasion of Iraq would be a fiasco. Bill Clinton will surprise you. He's to blame. Peripherally, he's the guy who signed the 1999 and the 2000 Act. After all that gay in the military nonsense, don't ask, don't tell, he triangulated over to the Republican side to stay in power. He was infected by the Republican madness, in short. Senator Phil Gramm, now he was a very scary fellow. He's the fellow who said, quit whining when the recession first started. He was the economics advisor to John McCain. Just be glad he's not running the show anymore. couple more people now. The CEO of Standard & Poor's. These are one of these rating agencies I was telling you about. Standard & Poor's issued these ratings, sprinkled the holy water. Do you remember that? All conflicts of interest were ignored, covered with a little tiny CYA. Emails have surfaced pursuant to subpoenas. Here's my favourite. Let's hope we are all wealthy and retired by the time this house of cards collapses. Another one, riffing now from Warren Buffett and the 750,000 pages of documents. A guy sent an email to his boss. There's no way we can possibly underwrite these CDOs. And his boss bounced back an email. You've got until Wednesday to do it. Standard & Poor's is a subsidiary of McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill was interviewed by Fortune magazine. The CEO is Terry McGraw, and he was asked if there was any blame attaching to his company. And he said, yes and no. We've pretty much covered AIG, Hank Greenberg, the fellow who famously put the CDS unit in London. Time is running out, so I can't name everybody. I can just name the scariest man on Wall Street, Dick Fuld, the CEO of Lehman Brothers. It goes on. The boss of Citibank became the first bank that was too big to fail. Lastly, Angelo Mazzillo, the CEO of Countrywide. He knew exactly what he was doing. He ignored warnings from people inside his company. He fired his CFO when he was told of the moral hazard he was getting into. Last but not least, dear viewer, you, the American public. You believe in fairy stories. We started with a fairy story. We're going to end with a fairy story. My advice to you is check out the fairy stories, especially if you're a Republican. In closing, to answer your question, David, it was a Republican ideology taken to an extreme without supervision, going back to Ronald Reagan, through Milton Friedman, Margaret Thatcher, George Bush I, George Bush II, took the world's economy to the brink of financial collapse.
Well, thank you, Ray. I wanted to ask if you could elaborate a little bit on the total value of the credit default swap market and the naked credit default swap, and how Republican ideology created that, and how that's still driving the market downward even today.
The naked shorting and the credit default swaps were allowed to happen because the brakes had been taken off the car.
Right.
If Reagan got the car going, if Clinton put it on cruise control, the deregulation did nothing to put the brakes on. The brakes had been taken off. This all happened because there was money to be made in it.
Right.
There was vast amounts of money to be made in all of this. Don't forget, the people buying these all around the world were gobbling up these tranches of derivatives because they were very high yielding. They were banging on Wall Street, give us more. Wall Street was banging on the mortgage companies, give us more mortgages. The mortgage companies were banging on their brokers, come on, come on, come on, your goals next month are even higher, even higher, even higher. The lending practices became more and more abusive. That's how it happened.
Ray, simultaneous with the event